Hi, my name's Mike Wines and I'd like to introduce you to my father. That's him there. Oops, phone's playing up. That's him there. Oh dear. Anyway, he's 77. He has Parkinson's at end stage. He has ischemic disease, dementia. But he's actually one of the lucky ones because he has been able to afford to move into a care home, which costs about £4,000 a month. When my mum died about 7 years ago from a heart attack, Dad moved into a warden-controlled flat, and he had social services care come in twice a day to make sure he was taking his medication, fluids and what have you. Because of the lack of funding that they had, they were often contracting out this care to local supposedly care companies. The quality wasn't exactly great of the care that he got. His fluid intake wasn't monitored enough, and he would frequently end up in hospital with a urinary tract infection. The hospital would give him some antibiotics, and because he had somewhere to go, because they had to clear the beds, they would send him home. And then ultimately, in a few weeks' time, the same thing would happen again and he would go into hospital. Every time he went into hospital, his Parkinson's medication wasn't under control properly, and so he deteriorated. It came to the point where he then bought a flat in a 24-hour medical controlled apartment block. Again, the service was provided by agencies, and they would go into his room at 6 o'clock in the morning, wake him up, get him up, give him his medication and a bit of breakfast, leave a drink in front of him, and then walk away until lunchtime. It then got to the point in Christmas 2015, the 4 months spanning it, he was in hospital 5 times. Same process. The hospital would do what they could for him in MAU, give him his antibiotics. Parkinson's meds were sort of controlled. Then he'd get sent back home, and then he'd be back in hospital again, until it got to the point a year ago that we managed to get him into a care home. He could only go into that care home because he was lucky enough to have his own funds. If he hadn't got the funds, I have no idea what would happen to him. He probably wouldn't be here now. This cannot be right. The NHS needs proper funding. The social services, supposed care in the community, needs proper funding. One last example of his hospital. A couple of weeks ago, he's a very sound sleeper. And a couple of weeks ago, the care home had problems rousing him one morning. They called out the paramedics. He has a very slow heartbeat, slightly irregular because of the ischemic, so he went into A&E. Excuse me. He arrived in A&E just about before I did. Typical Dad, he was wide awake when I saw him. We were in the corridor for 5 hours. Until they managed to get him into a booth within A&E so that they could do the blood tests, give him a couple of ECGs, and a doctor managed to quickly see him. 2 hours later, he was moved into what they call the majors part of A&E, just to move him along the system, so that, because the corridor was getting full. There were 14 ambulances outside, some waiting to drop off patients, some waiting to take patients home, some being used as an extension of the corridor. Finally, when he was in major, after having arrived in the hospital about 8 hours previously, they finally managed to find him a bed so he could get off the trolley and be made comfortable. At which point it was obvious he was going to be kept in overnight. Cardiologists were going to see him. and assess his situation. So I came home, had some rest. I phoned up in the morning at about 8 o'clock to find out that he'd been sent back home to the care home at 2:30 that morning. Now, there are people going to say, what a stupid time to send him home. The chances are they had to do that because he had somewhere to go and because they didn't have a bed. Just before I left him in Majors, there was talk of him either being moved to cardiology or to MAU, depending on where there was space for him. It would appear there wasn't space for him in either cardiology, MAU or A&E. So he was sent home. Luckily, he's in a care home that knows what they're doing, and he is now as fine as he can be considering his condition. As I say, he is one of the very lucky ones.